Hey, I'm Jake with the Dailed Cycling Lab.
And I'm Lance with the Dailed Cycling Lab.
Welcome back. We're here today to talk about the BMC URS, or UnReStricted.
Yes.
Short for unrestricted.
Yes.
Gravel bike. And this is a bike that I've personally been riding now for a little over a year, about 14 months. And Lance has been riding it for
7 days.
7 days. So the goal behind today was to give you some perspective on some long-term use, some of the things that I found that I love about it, and a couple things that maybe I don't like so much.
Yeah.
And just a general overall review of it. And then Lance is going to come to this with a ton of gravel riding experience.
Yeah, like 4,000 miles on a different gravel bike.
Correct.
So moving to this and seeing how it goes.
A little comparison and contrast
Yep.
of the geometries, if you will.
Yep.
So let's go ahead and go through the bike real quick and just talk to you a little bit about what the BMC URS is.
The first thing is, the URS is a gravel bike that is built almost with like a mountain bike geometry. It's kind of a blend between mountain bike hardtail and the BMC road machine. It's kind of a blend between the two. And
I absolutely fell in love with this bike the first time I rode on
Yeah.
it, because I felt like I was kind of on my road bike a little bit, but I started falling in love with it because I'd spent so much time on a hardtail mountain bike.
Yes.
And it just felt like I was at home. It was so comfortable yet fast and responsive. I loved it.
Yep.
So, okay, so some of the geometry about this bike is what I personally love about it. Lance, why don't you tell us a little bit about the geometry?
The biggest thing is the head tube angle is a very slack 70 degrees. Let me show you what that means. This is the head tube right here. And so this angle is at 70 degrees. So most gravel bikes are shallower with like 72 or 75 degrees. And most like long enduro mountain bikes are a little more slack. So this is 70 degree seat angle. That makes a big difference in the ride characteristics of a frame.
So a lot of people might be coming over from like a cyclocross bike. That might be their first foray into doing a little bit of that gravel riding, just because that's a bike that they had.
Yeah.
There's going to be a big noticeable difference between this bike and say a cross bike when you start riding.
The cross bike will have a much steeper angle, and so it just doesn't ride as smooth through.
Which is fantastic for riding in real tight, nimble stuff,
Yes.
aka cyclocross.
Correct.
The gravel bike's not necessarily built for that. It's more like an adventure bike that you want to go out and ride on all surfaces.
Correct.
So this covers a lot of the bases. You get that longer wheelbase with a slacker head tube angle, and then you've got the rest of the geometry of the bike that really plays well into
making it smoother for you. One of the things is it has a longer wheelbase, and wheelbase is from center of the wheel to center of the wheel. That distance from center of the wheel to center of the wheel is actually a little bit longer than most road bikes, even other gravel bikes, and that also gives this a smoother ride.
a very stable, smooth ride.
Yeah.
It also has what's called an MTT, or a micro travel technology, which is basically just a little elastomer that's back there in the seat stay. And what that does is it really absorbs a lot of the trail chatter that you get when you're riding on gravel roads. Gravel's not a very smooth surface.
No.
You'll hit a lot of washboard sections, little roots and rocks and ruts, things like that will jump up, and it really dampens a lot of that impact. But what else is really nice about that is when you're getting after it, it helps that rear wheel maintain traction with the road.
Correct.
And you're gonna hook up so much better.
Yeah. The travel on the MTT is about 10 millimeters.
Correct. It's not a lot.
So it's not a lot, but it's just enough that it just smooths out the ride for you.
Yeah, and what I like about that is you don't feel like you're losing a lot of your power transfer. You're not getting a lot of bob action in there.
Correct.
You'll feel it just a little bit, but you're not really losing much when you're on the road. As a matter of fact, in my opinion, the tiny bit of bob that you're going to deal with is way over compensated for in terms of the amount of traction that you're going to maintain with the road, and the rolling resistance that you're going to get is going to be far superior, which is going to be a net positive for you when you're talking about efficiency.
I found, coming from a different gravel bike, going to this one, I could stay seated on rougher terrain and keep power to the pedals on rougher terrain because it just had a little bit more give.
Gotcha.
So,
gotcha.
Yeah.
A couple other things about this bike. We've got the integrated cockpit, which is the ICS that BMC makes for a lot of their road bikes. And go ahead and talk about that, Lance.
The beauty of it, it routes the brake cables through the cockpit. So there's no cables up here at all.
It's very clean. Yeah,
this has Force E-Tap shifters on it, so there's no cables showing at all up front, which is very nice.
Something that it's gonna look pretty, it's gonna be nice, it's gonna be a little bit more aerodynamic if you want to start splitting hairs, And it's going to be one last thing to get snagged when you're out there riding. So if you're riding in some thick foliage or whatnot, it's just not going to get hung up.
Correct.
It's nice.
Another thing is that comes from hardtail, mountain bike hardtail technology is the longer carbon seat post. That also gives you a little bit more flex and a little bit more smoothness in the ride.
It does, and they've got their D-ring, their D seat post. So the back end of the seat post is flat with the front of it kind of being a little bit of an arc. And it's really one of those things that you can only put it in one way. So the seat post is always pointing forward.
Correct.
You don't really have a situation where it's going to rotate in there on you. And they do a really good job with their seat mount too, where they've got a forward and a rear positioned seat bolt that checks motion both ways. So again, you're not going to be riding and hit a bump and all of a sudden your nose is down or your worst nose is up and not being happy time. So that seat, once you pretty much get it locked in and set up the right way, it's not going to go anywhere in most situations.
Most situations.
We'll get to that later.
The other good thing about this model is the frame protection that it comes with. And you don't usually get this on a lot of gravel bikes.
No.
But there are rubber pads down here to protect the bottom bracket. There's actually clear tape on this down tube. This spot gets scratched up all the time, and this will help protect that.
Correct.
The other thing that this comes with is bumpers on the fork mounts. You take your front wheel out, you set your carbon forks down in the parking lot, it can scratch up, and that helps protect that.
Correct. So the last feature that we really like about this, and this is kind of a hot topic, something that can be debated, but we really like the fact that this only comes in a 1x drivetrain setup. So you've got a 1x12 gearing combination.
Correct.
On all the bikes.
Yeah, one front chainring and then 12 gears in the back.
Quite like that. There's some people that are going to debate that that's not going to be enough gearing or too much gearing in some scenarios. I would tend to disagree. I think that there are some changes that you can make to the bike to make it really spot on perfect.
Story time.
Go for it.
My last bike had a 2x drivetrain. It had two chain rings up front. And just recently, it almost stranded me very far out. My front derailleur quit working. This doesn't have a front derailleur. And it was stuck in the small chain ring. Mm-hmm. Because it was stuck in the small chain ring, okay, no big deal. I can just do the ride in a small chain ring. But I was descending very fast at like 30 miles an hour. And my chain was, you get this chain slap. Yeah. Yep. And I'm spitting as well. You get this chain slap and my chain got sucked up into right next to the derailleur and it reeked my chain. It ruined it.
Yep, and that would probably not have happened had you had a 1x drivetrain because you wouldn't have had the front shifter that would have failed.
Correct.
And you probably would have been on a drivetrain that was probably clutched, or at least clutched a little bit better to keep that chain nice and taut throughout the whole range.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So
that's a bonus there. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a few though.
Yep.
Great. All right, so the good about this bike. Some of the stuff that we really like about the bike. I'm gonna let Lance go first because he's been all giddy about this bike because he just got to start riding it, and so he wants to share his goods.
If you get in rough terrain, it rips. It loves rougher terrain, rougher gravel roads, single track. It like acts like a hardtail, you know, and so
this truly is a bike. Well, all gravel bikes are kind of this way, but this truly is a bike that you can ride anywhere.
Yes.
It's just like if you're having one of those days where I don't know what I feel like doing today, just jump on this bike and trust me, you'll find it all and you'll do it all and you'll be happy you did. It's just one of those bikes that really just makes you happy every time you ride it.
The next thing is it climbs really well. With the gearing that you have and everything, it climbs really well. So we love it.
All right, the next thing that we really love about this bike is the fact that it descends extremely well. It's very smooth and very stable because of that longer wheelbase. The bike does really well once you do one thing to it. We'll get to that in just a minute.
We'll get to that. But yeah, that slack head angle, the longer wheelbase, it rips downhill.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
What's the next one, Lance?
The next one is the ride on it is just incredibly smooth. And we talked about that. From the MTT and the long seat post, it's just a smoother ride. Plus, it comes with 40 mil tires, and 40 mil tires is just like a joy on gravel roads.
Yeah, you can actually take that up to a 45 millimeter tire too if you want to, so you can get it even more plush. But these 40s, this bike setup with 40s is pretty nice.
You could also put 650Bs on, and it'll go up to a 47 with the 650B.
Correct. So that's an option for those that like that bigger, beefier tire.
Yep.
The next one is the fact that it's internal cable routing.
Just clean cockpit.
It's very clean. It's just a very nice aesthetic. The next one.
The frame protection that comes on it, the stickers and the rubber things, it Yeah, that's great for the frame protection. Yep.
It's really easy to get this bike fit to you, and I really enjoy the handlebars that are on this bike. These Easton bars are, they got a nice little flare to them. They're very comfortable.
A little wider.
So that's going to give you a little bit more stability when we're talking about getting through some of this more sketchy stuff. The drops aren't too terribly difficult, but they're also like very deep, but they're also not very high. So it's just a nice, comfortable position to be in.
My other gravel bars were a little narrower, and I thought they were really great. These are way better.
With the good comes the bad.
The bad.
The bad. So here's a couple things that we dislike about the bike. Some of them actually are pretty easy to change, and there's a few things that you just have to tinker with it a little bit. So what's the first one? The
first thing is it's not that aero. It has a bit of an upright position, and so it's really not that aero of a bike, especially if you're talking about racing.
Yep, it just puts you in an upright position where your body's gonna start catching a lot of that wind, and that's gonna slow you down a bit. There are some fixes to it though.
Yeah, one of the things I did, this is my bike, and I actually removed one of the spacers and moved the whole cockpit down one spacer so that it was a little bit more aero.
So he did more than just remove one spacer though. He actually cut the steer tube down by, what was it, 10 millimeters?
Yeah, I did. Yep.
There's room to actually cut it down just a little bit more if you really wanted to, but that's not something that everybody would have to do. So you have the capacity to get that fit a little bit more fine-tuned to make yourself a little bit more aero. So you can be the weekend warrior, cycling enthusiast, gravel enthusiast, all the way up to the bike racer that wants to take this thing seriously.
Correct.
And you can find a fit that works well for you.
Yeah. The next bad thing is I found the bike came under geared.
Yes.
And we talked about this. It descends great, but you can spin out, especially if you're in a gravel race.
Yes.
And you're trying to go downhill fast. Sometimes in these big, longer gravel races, you'll have a 6 or 5 mile downhill descent, and you can spin out. So the bike actually comes with a 38-inch front chainring.
38 tooth.
38. Not 38 inch. Would that be like this big?
That'd be pretty stinking big.
So this is a 38 tooth front chainring. You can see how much smaller it is than the one I put on here. So that was one of the first things I did is I took off this 38T and I put on a 46T on my
I found that there was a grade by where I live, and I would take the bike out and test it out to get the fit right. And I was riding it with this 38 tooth, and it was maybe like a 3% grade going downhill, and it would start to spin out probably like 30, 31 miles an hour, 32 maybe, but your cadence is getting super high. At the recommendation of a teammate, he suggested that I jump up to a 46 tooth.
46.
I thought that might be a little much for the bike. I ended up jumping up to a 42 tooth, and that actually did pretty well for me.
Yeah.
I did opt to actually jump up to a 46 tooth.
46.
But the 42 tooth on there, on that same grade, I was spinning out at about 35 or 36 miles an hour, and I couldn't think of too many situations where I would get dropped. But after putting a little bit more thought to it, jumping up to that 46 tooth would only give me a little bit more capacity to go a little bit faster if I absolutely had to, and it wasn't going to take away from the climbing that I needed to do, because that rear cassette is massive.
That was my biggest concern, is I put a 46 on it. What climbing gears am I going to lose? Well, this bike comes with a 1052.
Yep.
It's got a 52 on it. That's a freaking pie plate.
Yep. So Lance is riding the 2021 URS 012.
Yeah.
And I'm riding the 2020 URS 011. Yep. And that comes with a 1050 cassette on there, and it came stock with the 38 tooth chainring on there. And they're pretty similar. So we both now have a 46 up front, and the back, he's just got a little bit bigger of a big gear than I do with the 52 tooth instead of the 50.
I don't think I'm going to lose anything.
There's not too many situations and scenarios where I have found that I need to have that big of a gear combination.
It just seemed like a lost opportunity. You have this bike that descends so well, and yet you can just spin out on it. Now, maybe that's because most people aren't going to be racing this bike.
Correct.
I'm going to race this bike. I need to go fast on it.
Correct.
Yeah.
So it just depends on what your best usage is. The downside is you can't spec this when you first buy the bike unless you're doing a custom build from a frame module up. If you're going to buy one of the pre-built bikes, you're just going to get what you get. But you do have the option to go ahead and make that purchase. And what is the cost of a new chainring? About $100?
I think so.
About $100 just to make that change. And if you pulled the old one off that you just got with the bike and you haven't used it, there's a good chance that you can throw it up for sale on your local you know, whatever, and get it sold and recoup some of that money. It's just the hassle of having to go through that.
This has 20 miles on it.
Yeah, it's for sale.
For sale.
All right, what's another bad thing on there?
The next bad thing, the micro travel technology, the MTT, the little bumper in the back, as fantastic as it is, it needs to be serviced. It's one more moving part that is gonna need to be serviced.
Okay, so I've had my bike for 14 months. I've had to service it one time. And then that one time, it took me all of about 5 minutes, maybe 10 tops to service it. You really just pop off a couple caps, pull out 2 screws, clean everything up, grease it, put it back together, down, torque it, spec it, put the caps back on, move forward.
BMC recommends servicing it once a year, depending on how much wet, nasty, dusty stuff the year.
Yeah, and the only reason why I knew I needed to service it was because it was making some squeaky noises. We ride in some pretty heinous weather around here sometimes, and this is the weapon of choice for that.
Yeah.
And it became time. It started to squeak. You know, a bike that makes noise needs service. So I serviced it, and it's been good ever since.
The next thing we don't like about it is, this is a common problem with BMC bikes, is the stem torque bolts are very hard to reach. Stem torque bolts. Yep, they're tucked right up underneath. So they point back towards the bike, and you've got to be able to get a torque wrench up underneath there to torque them down. When you've got, well, if you're using like the Park Tool torque wrench, it just doesn't fit up there very well. It's hard to get it
So
to fit.
there are other ones, like I think Feedback Sports has one that
I have one that fits
pretty well.
Yeah.
Or you can, if you're just really good and you've got very sensitive hands and you've torqued a lot of stuff down in your time, you can use an Allen key that's got the rounded head on it and get it up in there and tighten it just right.
Yep.
So hitting that torque spec though is super important, because if you don't, then the bars are going to rotate. And you've only got 2 bolts that hold that in place.
Correct.
And this actually leads to one of my things that I don't like about the bike personally, is that I've actually had probably a half dozen times where it was torqued to spec and I'm riding and I hit a pothole or I hit a root or something like that, and my hands were on the hoods and the bars rotated forward a little bit. It scares the you-know-what out of you when it happens. But I haven't had an issue where it was detrimental where it went down.
Do you think you didn't have enough like carbon paste in there or something? Or
so I spoke to BMC about that, and they recommended that I go with something that's a little bit grittier. I was using at the time, it might have been what came with the bike. They sent it with a little tube, so I put that in there. Maybe I didn't put enough, but I did take it apart and clean it, and I put in some Park Tool stuff, which was a little too fluid, so I took that apart and then put some other stuff in there that was even grittier. And I put a very, very generous helping on there.
Okay.
And that seemed to really help the problem. I have noticed them move once, but it wasn't an egregious move. It was just like maybe a millimeter or less that it moved. So you got to really make sure that you nail that. You got to make sure that that torque spec is spot on. You didn't hear this from me, and I'm saying this off the record, but maybe just a tiny bit over torquing it. Not too much, but maybe like a half a newton meter just to make sure it's nice and snug.
Just don't break the carbon.
Yeah, exactly. And plenty of carbon paste will do the trick. So that's just my 2 cents. That's what I do for my bike. What you do for your bike is up to you. Stick with the torque spec.
Yep. The last thing that we don't think is so good is these bikes are spendy.
They're not cheap at all.
They're not cheap. This model, the 2021 URS 01-2, is about $6,500.
Bring it all in.
Yeah. So
it's green for a reason, right?
That's right. The 2021 URS 01-1 comes in at roughly $9,500, but it does come with a sweet pair of Envy gravel specific wheels.
Yep. And
which
a really cool purple color.
It is purple.
I didn't think that I would like it, but it's grown on me. It's actually a beautiful bike.
The more I see it in people taking pictures of it in the wild, I kind of dig the purple too.
Yep.
So
yeah, it's a nice bike. The more expensive one is definitely spendy. You're getting a spectacular set of wheels on it. You've got your top shelf group set on it. You've got a really nice, super nice frame. Everything's integrated. You've got lightweight carbon bars. I mean, it's a pretty fantastic bike all around. It's just a little on the expensive side. So they also have the URS 3, which is how much?
It's $4,300.
$43.99?
Something like that.
Something like that. And then they have a frame module too that you can get, which comes in at
$3,600 for the frame module.
Pretty nice little setup. You can do a custom build on that and have fun with it as well. A couple of other bonus things that we like about this bike.
Yes, there are a ton of frame mounts on it. Spots for fenders, spots for like pannier bags and stuff like that. You can also get these frame bags that come from BMC that are custom made. for a spot right here. It will attach right to your top tube, this top tube bag, which is pretty slick.
Yeah, I think those come in at like $25 or $30 for these guys.
Something like that.
Which is kind of nice.
Yeah.
Okay, one last thing is I actually don't mind the seat. I'm very fickle when it comes to my seats. There's a certain style and a certain feel. When I got on this bike, I thought for sure I was going to want to change it, but this WTB saddle is not too shabby.
I am very unfickle about my saddle, and it still felt great.
Still felt great.
Yeah.
It's kind of cool too, the seat mount. The way that the seat mount comes up, there's a spot on the back of it where there's a little screw underneath, and there's a fender that comes with that. It pretty much keeps a lot of the mud and the water and the grit off of your backside, which is kind of cool too.
Yep.
It's not going to protect your buddies who are riding behind you, but it keeps it off you.
Yes.
So.
I've used it several times already.
Good.
So
Good.
Easy to put on and take off.
So wrap up on this bike is I think it's a fantastic gravel bike. It's a little on the expensive side, but you're getting really good bang for your buck. It's a fantastic bike that you can ride for a lot of years and do a lot of great things.
I'm in love with it. You know, after all these years on a different frame, I'm in love with it. I'm excited to put it through some races and see if it'll win me some coin.
Yep.
I don't win anything.
Any desire to go back to your Norco?
You know, my Norco has a dropper post, and this doesn't. However, you can install a dropper post on these if you want.
Okay.
But no, I think I'm gonna stick with this one. It is smoother and nicer. I like it.
Right, just in full disclosure, here at the Dailed Cycling Lab, we are a BMC dealer. So it is a bike that we do sell, and we chose to sell BMC for a reason because we think that they make a super nice bike.
Yep.
This review is purely like unbiased in my opinion.
Yep.
If you don't buy a bike from us, that's fine. We just want to let you know about how great this bike actually is.
That's why we said all the bad stuff too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's true. So just wanted to put that out there in case you were wondering. Thanks for watching this video.
Yes, thank you.
And we will be back soon for another one. Bye for now.